Good evening, everyone. Thank you so very much for coming tonight. My name is Arthur Milikh. I am the Executive Director of the Claremont Institute's Center for the American Way of Life here in Washington, D.C. We basically have two missions. Number one is keeping the right more honest and therefore more useful to the country. And the second is exposing and refuting the doctrines which the left uses to govern our society today. Tonight, it is my pleasure to welcome Scott Yenor, who is a Washington Fellow at the Center for the American Way of Life, and the author of The Recovery of Family Life, a very fine book, widely reviewed, which I would commend to everybody. His talk tonight will be on feminism, which is precisely one of these doctrines that currently distorts our politics and makes us misunderstand what the purpose of our nation is. Thank you very much. Scott?
Thank you guys all for coming. Tonight my talk is on feminism and the American future. The battles against feminism seem to be yesterday's news. We remember names of the past like Phyllis Schlafly. The late Rush Limbaugh talked about feminazis. But active opposition to feminism seems to have died out with the defeat of the ERA in the early 1980s. Few of those who try to defend the family today provide any direct critique of feminism. Conservatives and family advocates have made peace with it, either from conviction or from political necessity. Perhaps most have their eyes open and understand how making peace with feminism has put a fatal circle around what can be accomplished in family policy and a fatal circle around what can be accomplished as a people. Ultimately, that fatal circle is indeed fatal to family life and to the country. Conservatives fritter around the edges of feminism. Feminism is one thing, they say, but abortion is quite another. Feminism is one thing, but we still do not want Title IX witch hunts to undermine due process. Feminism is one thing, but discrimination in the workplace should require higher standards of proof. Feminism is one thing, but national daycare is expensive, and perhaps we should not fund it with public monies. Thus, conservatives pose as pro-life, or pro-due process, or as meritocrats, or budget hawks, without ever challenging the principles of feminism. Perhaps we should take stock of this approach. Has it worked? Have conservatives made gains on issues that matter to them as they have accommodated feminism over the last 2 or 3 generations? Are America's families healthier, sturdier than they were 2 generations ago? Is marriage in better shape? The answer to these questions is obvious. Fewer people marry much later, many more women are childless, birth rates are declining, many more accept cohabitation as equal to marriage. These trend lines are accelerating each generation. And I could go on, but the story is familiar to all. Feminism's fatal circle has severely compromised marriage and family life. The conservative approach, promoting other things like life or due process that limit feminism without challenging the feminist view of the world, it has failed. And this leads to an uncomfortable truth. We cannot save marriage and family life without challenging the assumptions of feminism, but those assumptions seem pretty sewn into the nation's fabric. Ours is a time of crisis and turmoil, and feminism sits at the center of our civilization's rot. So let's talk about what feminism is and why it poses long-term existential threat to our civilization and really to any civilization. First, let us talk about what feminism is. Many people have hackneyed phrases about what feminism is. It means giving women more choices in life, they say. It means granting women control of their bodies or breaking glass ceilings. These ways of formulating what feminism is are meant to cow its opponents into agreeing. No one opposes choice or achievement. And no one favors someone else controlling anyone else's body. None of these things has ever been the aim of feminism. The predominant school of thought among feminists want women to make certain kinds of choices and to do certain things with their bodies. These feminists want a new kind of woman. And they want women to strive for independence. They want women to be more sexually aggressive and less modest. They want devoted careerists, not devoted mothers. And it is this vision of the new woman that poses the threat to the family and to the country. Now, I want to try to bring clarity to what feminism is, because in the final analysis, what feminists demand is a commitment to a continuous and unending revolution in human life, what I call the rolling revolution. Moderate feminism is an oxymoron. There are only what I call retail feminists and radical ones. And this is a hard teaching. And it ignores how people label themselves. But I ask you to open your ears and to open your minds to this truth, because it is a truth about our own situation. The most impressive and influential feminists of the late 60s and early 70s were radical feminists. And they provided a blueprint and a roadmap for all subsequent feminists. Today's feminists still follow that blueprint, either knowingly or blindly. Kate Millett was one of these great impressive feminists of the early radical sort, and she articulated 3 pillars or aims of feminist ambition. Let us talk about these 3 aims. First, feminists seek to end, quote, the ideology of male supremacy and the traditional socialization by which it is upheld in matters of status, roles, and temperament. Sex roles in child rearing, where girls are encouraged to play house while boys roughhouse, must fade and eventually disappear. Disparities in the workplace and differences in career ambitions must vanish. The sexes must be made happy in much the same way. Anything leading to unequal power differences between the sexes or different statuses, roles, and characters must be eliminated in law. And it must be eliminated in culture too. No one articulated this pillar of feminist ambition better than Susan Muller-Oken, a significant feminist activist of the 70s and 80s. The end of patriarchal socialization would demand, Oken writes, that one's sex would have no more relevance than one's eye color or the length of one's toes in determining any aspect of a person's life. Men and women must be made to be identical in all things, tastes, hopes, desires, and this is pillar 1, the end of patriarchal socialization. Second, the women must secure complete economic and emotional independence from marriage and family life. To achieve this, women must start with finding fulfilling, lucrative jobs outside the home. They mustn't depend on their husbands or on anyone else for money. But an important corollary to this goal for Millett is ending the present chattel status of children and minors. The dependence of children, she says, is a male invention, designed to make women feel as if they were needed to raise their children and hence become dependent on their husbands. And this is pillar 2, the economic and emotional independence of women from the family. Third, women must participate in sexual revolution, broadly understood. Feminists hope, in Millett's phrase, for an end to the traditional sexual inhibitions and taboos, including especially ending the moral beliefs that support monogamous marriage, which is supported by a belief in monogamy, fidelity, parental responsibility, and other elements of traditional morality. As a result, feminists bless homosexuality, illegitimacy, adolescent, pre-adolescent, premarital sex, extramarital sex, in order to liberate sexuality from marriage. They obviously go well beyond just encouraging sex without reproduction. Sexually liberated women would be more sexually adventurous. They would initiate sex as much as men because, according to the radical feminists, male initiative and control in sexual matters is proof of female subordination. This is pillar 3, the end of all sexual taboos. Now, no feminists speak in these broad, ambitious terms today, or at least very few do. Most feminists operate toward these goals without understanding how their smaller concerns today contribute to this larger project. These are what I call retail feminists, seeking to sell today's goals and preparing tomorrow for more reform. Today, they sell women in STEM to end patriarchal socialization. Today, they sell national daycare to promote economic independence of women from the family. Today, they sell early childhood sexual education so as to end taboos. But the goals of these retailers promote the 3 pillars. Retailers never think about when their job would be over because it never is over. There is always a next reform to push. This is the rolling revolution. Radical feminists end up, retail feminists end up bleeding into radical feminism. This is the lived experience of feminism in broad outline from the last generations. And we should add up what these 3 pillars mean. These 3 pillars of feminist reform point to the abolition of the family. Marriage and family life reflect differences between men and women, especially those involving procreation and raising and educating children. Family life is based on mutual dependence and community between men and women and their children, so dissolving marriage leads to greater independence. Sexual self-control is necessary to marriage, so the feminist hope of ending sexual taboos and inhibitions strikes at the heart of the sexual ethic necessary to sustain marriage. So the challenge conservatives face is the ideology of feminism fosters the abolition of the family. And this should not come as a surprise. This is the exact plan of the radical feminists that they have set for themselves from the beginning in the thought of Simone de Beauvoir, all the way up to today's lesser lights like Sophie Lewis. A battle against feminism, therefore, cannot be avoided, and much is at stake in the battle. The feminist culture rolls toward its 3 pillars, constantly pushing toward them and using increasingly tyrannical cultural and political levers to get us there. We must ask what the world will look like as feminism accomplishes its 3 goals. So what happens if we end patriarchal socialization, cultivate the economic and emotional independence of women from the family, and end sexual taboos? What does this do to men and women in family life? What kind of a nation can stand on these 3 pillars? We have been running a species of societal experiment on abolishing the family among our lower classes, especially those in rural Trump country and in inner cities. While few in these regions talk the talk of the feminist abolition of the family or of feminist aspiration, they walk the walk. Women assert their independence. The idea of roles, special roles for men and women, has been stigmatized. The lower classes are downstream from our dominant culture's feminism. And the conditions of life in these areas is really, really bad. Not worthy of a great nation, and not remediable through dropping helicopter money on the proles. Would the nation survive if the whole of it has the family practice of Appalachia or the south side of Chicago? Obviously not. Without anything above them to serve, the strings of human ambition and responsibility loosen. And that's the problem. And one of the great changes in our time is that unlike 30 years ago, no one seems to care. This is the greatest indication of feminism's triumph among the ruling elite in America, and the greatest sign of their corruption. No one is allowed to notice that our fellow citizens suffer through the destruction of their families. Now, marriage is different among the upper classes. It is what scholars call a neo-traditional marriage. It happens later. It's less fruitful. Sexual experimentation happens beforehand, but stable and child-centered it is. People in neo-traditional marriages value fidelity, and they practice the old sexual division of labor some, though they are embarrassed by it. They talk like it's the new millennium, but they kind of live like it's 1950. Many family activists have praised the success sequence that gives rise to this neo-traditional marriage, and they hope to spread it. Finish school, get a job, then marry before having children. That's the success sequence. And this success sequence has led to stable neo-traditional marriages. But this success sequence is a social science invention, extrapolating from current trends and values and showing how they promote individual interest. Why can't the lower classes be more like the upper classes? It, in effect, asks. But I think this is bad science, and I know that it's bad public philosophy. It's bad science because it just assumes that people will continue to value marriage and having children, when no such assumption is warranted. Feminism's cultural critique of marriage and family life is embedded in our culture, and it is part of why people decreasingly value in marriage family life. But the success sequence assumes that current trends of value will continue, when the power of feminism suggests that it will decline. And it is bad public philosophy because it ignores that sustaining healthy family life is a political endeavor, shaped by our regnant ideologies, and our regnant ideology, when it comes to the family, is feminism. The success sequence is just another conservative accommodation of feminism, one that works for a moment in the rolling revolution, but does nothing to stop it. So advocates for the family need to reconstruct the old ideas of man and woman, duly changed for our circumstances, a new embrace of manliness, and a new defense of womanly distinctiveness that can point people toward marriage are most needful. Feminism stigmatizes various elements of manliness in the search for our androgynous future. If the future is female, that is the whole ethic, one that dispenses with the idea of manliness. Males should not be providers, we are told, or leaders of family, or even engage the family overmuch, except to support womanly nurturing. Males should be ashamed of the wildness in their hearts and the need they have for competitive greatness or iron sharpening iron. We tell ourselves the story that women will be attracted to nice, respectable, good Christian men, when in reality, women do like men of accomplishment and status. Men are left underemployed as males, with little distinctive to do except be allies of others. And underemployed manliness, the intentional byproduct of feminism, ends up either uninteresting for women or a little too interesting for society. Nor does feminism promise of career fulfillment yield womanly happiness. Feminism has moved the needle on womanly independence and androgyny and sexual assertiveness, but this has not redounded to the happiness of women. This is evident in surveys about happiness, as well as the increased incidence of depression, medication, and suicide attempts among women. How to fit work into marriage is a much better question for young women than how to fit marriage into their career ambitions. Preparing men and women for marriage is a great cultural project. It begins with seeing marriage and family life as great, meaningful accomplishments within the reach of most people. But these accomplishments do not happen automatically. There are certainly natural things to work with, but only when culture adds something to nature. Women find status and strength attractive. Women form hubs of community, and most want something more and other than a career. Women seek enduring relations through sex more often than men do. Men want to serve something greater than themselves. But now, no one is taught that you can add all these natural attributes up through making a home together or making a family together. And certainly the effort to do so is not honored. Men and women have vices. Men seek pleasure and can be wild at heart, while women are more subject to vanity and fickleness. Marriage corrects each of these problems or provides the best workable solution to these challenges of their natures. If marriage doesn't lead to happiness, a strong marriage at least fosters less unhappiness for two broken people. The idea that there is an endless supply of marriageable men and women to satisfy the demands of marriage, an endless supply of people to participate in the success sequence, fails to recognize how our feminist culture stigmatizes the great cultural project of bringing men and women together in marriage. Men and women are thus deprived of one of the great venues for human accomplishment, and all these feminist pillars get in the way of it. Of course, children do better with parents living together in an enduring marriage too, but the more fundamental thing now needs to be talked about. We cannot take for granted that people will have children. But that is what is taken for granted in the success sequence. People who share a deep common good with one another, who value their marriage as central to their self-understanding, are more likely to have children and to raise them to an honorable adulthood. The success sequence mimics marriage, but misses its essence in how it prioritizes and values things. If many do not learn to serve something greater than themselves in families, it is difficult to see how they will serve something greater than themselves in politics. The decline of nations and the decline of families go together. No great nation can be built on the idea that we should end all sexual taboos. No great nation can have as its chief ethic to cultivate economic and emotional independence. Nor can a great nation aim at ending patriarchal socialization. Nations and families serve something greater than themselves. They give individuals a universe of meaning. Shatter that meaning, and you get wandering men and disreputable women. Israel, where birth rates are highest and where patriotism seems most alive in the modern world, stands out as an example of how these things can be connected. Most other countries testify to this connection in the negative: less love of country and fewer children. America is on that trajectory, and only through rejecting the pernicious ideology of feminism can it find a way back to national purpose. Thank you.